But I want to wrap up this message series. We started this 2 weeks ago. It's just a mini series. If you missed the last couple of weeks, the replays are on YouTube, which is continuing to. Our YouTube has grown about 30% in the last 90 days. So we're grateful for more people connecting online, and maybe you're watching this now. We value you. We want to connect with you as well and serve you. But this series we've called "You Have Heard It Said." And we looked at a couple of different times where Jesus addresses folks and says, "You have heard it said," which was a reference to things from the law, which we now know as the Old Testament. "But I say unto you," and then Jesus would begin to redefine or bring new meaning. Well, we're going to look at a little bit bigger chunk this morning, and this is not a direct quote where Jesus says, "You have heard it said," but the picture that we've been painting over the last couple of weeks is how Jesus was bringing correction to false teaching. He wasn't correcting the law itself. He was correcting religious folks' interpretation of the law. You see, the religious leaders and even just sort of everyday people of the time, they read the things in the law and then they analyzed. And they ask questions. And questions in of themselves aren't bad, but they weren't asking the right questions because they had a lens that they were looking through. And I hope briefly this morning to help us go back and re-examine one of Jesus's teachings through a kingdom of God lens, to get the meaning of what Jesus was trying to say. And hopefully this picture, and I do have some diagrams we'll get to in a little bit, will show us that this is a clear contrast that actually runs all throughout the New Testament of Jesus showing us the real meaning in his kingdom and in his teachings. And I think we need to get a hold of some of that this morning. But we're going to go ahead and read. I'm in Matthew 5, so if you have a Bible or Bible device, the scriptures will be on the screen. But we're going to go ahead and read. This is just the very first 12 verses of Matthew 5. I mentioned this before. This whole passage, we're not going to do the whole passage, but this is called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the first thing I want to say is historical context is important. And so the context of these opening statements, it says in verse 1, "One day as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down, and his disciples gathered around him." So the context of this conversation is that Jesus is primarily instructing his disciples. Now, you may or may not realize Jesus had more than 12 disciples. There was the 12, there was the inner circle. He even had, now this might not be the correct way to say it, his like favorite three, and there's like these concentric circles around Jesus. So I don't know if this was the 12, the 72, there's no telling, but these are disciples of Jesus. These are people that have said yes to following him, and he is instructing them as his disciples, okay? In verse 2, it says, he began to teach them. Now, this is where the Beatitudes begin. Now, how many of you don't have to raise your hand, how many of you have heard the Beatitudes before? Right? We've heard it taught. There's probably sort of a standard way. I'm not claiming to have anything new, but I think we might look at them from a different perspective this morning. Verse 3 says, God blesses those who are poor in the Greek, and some translations actually says poor in spirit. We'll get back to that in a minute. And realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, we're going to stop there before we go on and read the whole passage, because I want to begin to show you what Jesus is saying before we look at the rest of these statements. I believe if we look in the context of what God is doing, what Jesus is saying, the way he's teaching and leading his disciples, this is another "you have heard it said." And he's saying, I'm saying to you, this is how my Father is. Now, I'm not saying his Father is poor. He's saying God blesses those who are poor in spirit and realize their need for him. Jesus was saying, I'm showing you by example. I even though he's God, came as a person and he needed his Father. He needed the relationship. He realized his need. We probably need to follow that example. Okay, this might be a little easier on the next one. Verse 4, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Maybe that's outside of your paradigm to think that God mourns. I think God has the full range of emotional possibilities. I don't think that the emotions that we experience now, our emotions can get twisted and deceived, sure. But the range of emotions that exist in humanity, the Bible tells us we were created in the image of God. God mourns. So he's telling his disciples, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I hear him saying in that, God cares. When you're struggling, when you experience loss, we talked last week about suffering, insult, and loss. That is a reality for the believer. And Jesus showed us he was willing to suffer insult and loss, but his Father wasn't without care. He didn't just say, well, buck up, buddy. It's going to be a rough ride. Your Father in heaven cares when you have loss. He does. He cares. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. Jesus says, my dad is humble. Now, it's not mutually exclusive with his justice and his holiness and all the other things we could say, but they're all true at the same time. He is humble. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. Now, this has gotten pretty twisted in culture. Thirst and hunger for justice. We're talking about righteous justice. God is a righteous judge, and he judges from a place of love and compassion. I told you a little story last week about kind of getting my butt whooped by God, getting some discipline for something I was dealing with, right? He disciplines those he loves because he has the right, the only right, to judge. And he's not judging you as a person, but he does judge sin. And we define that as anything that breaks the intimacy of the relationship. I have a relationship, an open, honest, intimate relationship with my Father by his Spirit. And there's a closeness and an intimacy. And when I operate outside of the identity that he gave me, I can cause a break in that relationship. That's what we're talking about when we say it's not just a list of do's and don'ts. Yes, there are things you shouldn't do. They will bring you harm. We have a baby. She's not quite to this point yet, but we were explaining to the big kids. As she gets older, we're going to have to teach her things like, don't touch the stove. It's hot. She doesn't know to be afraid of that. That's a learned thing. But we're going to teach her that because we care and we don't want her to get hurt. So I'm not saying that it's a free-for-all, that there's no do's and don'ts, but I'm saying the essence is the relational connection. God wants to connect with you. And if you're following him, he's not going to lead you into things that are on the don't list. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, we hammered this last week. God is merciful. His mercy is greater than his judgment. He does have judgment towards sin, but his mercy towards us is even greater. His love towards you as one of his kids, it's like it burns with a flame that is hotter. He is crazy about you, and he is merciful. God blesses those whose hearts are pure. Jesus is saying, my Father has pure heart and pure motive. Now that seems obvious, but that means that we need to move towards that with his help. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right. Again, last week, do you suffer insult and loss even when you do the right thing sometimes? The kingdom of heaven is yours. God blesses when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things. Man, he's really expanding on this one because he knows we deal with it. Because you are my followers. Now, I don't like this next sentence. It says with an exclamation mark, be happy about it. Be very glad. Why? For a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Jesus is saying, I know what it's like. I know that you can make it. I know that you can endure it. And I know that I have something for you. I didn't pull up the passage, but the Bible also tells us that the weight of his glory is not even worthy to be compared to the weight of the negative things that we experience here today. Like the times where you suffer loss and insult and difficulty or go through trials. And I'm not denying that those things are real, that those feelings are big. Like, I'm not minimizing any of that. But what I'm saying is, if we can endure, if we can persist with God's Spirit, the weight of his glory is even greater, so much greater that we can't even give an accurate comparison. And so you might be in a moment or a season today where you just feel like your heart got ripped out and kicked over in the corner. And I'm sorry that that's your situation. I feel for you, and I understand how that can feel. I've had moments and seasons that felt like that. But the depth of pain that you're experiencing is like just a grain of salt compared to the universe of God's glory, the weight of his goodness, and the reward that he has for you. Now, here's where I want to begin to look at this from a little bit different angle, because when we start talking about reward, I don't know about you, but if you were raised in church, and some of you weren't, and that's good. If you were raised in church, you might have heard teachings, or your first thought might be, yes, reward, the mansion that I have in glory, the gold crown. You start thinking about things that are waiting for you. I want to propose to you this morning that what Jesus is saying through this passage, and we're going to contrast this with the way that Pharisees and religious teachers would have understood it. What Jesus is saying is that God himself is the reward. His presence. Did you know that that reality wasn't the same? So let's go ahead and do this. Let's put up the first diagram. Now, just stay with me here. If this is not self-explanatory. I'm going to walk you through this. This is how they would have understood this when the teachers of the law were teaching these things. They thought you do the right thing. So that means keeping the law. So there's all the things in the law, ceremonial sacrifice and do's and don'ts, like all of these things, right? And they thought you do the right thing so that you can receive blessing. Well, that doesn't sound bad. I like blessing, right? What does blessing look like? Happiness, prosperity, right? I can feel good about myself because I did the things. That was their understanding. Do the right thing, receive blessing, prosper, be happy. That was the whole cycle. And so they began to dissect the law. You heard I don't have time to totally unpack this, but one of the things that the religious leaders did was fence the Torah. Now, if you've not heard that phrase, look it up. It's an interesting study. But they began to ask questions. They would read things in the law and say, okay, it says God blesses those who are poor in spirit. Well, how poor? How many things do I need to give away? Right? Like they started dissecting things to look for like a scholar, and I'm not knocking scholars, but it's like they were dissecting it down to the minute letter of the law to see if they could do it better in order to gain God's blessing. I want to propose to you this morning that what Jesus was saying is that knowing God, that relationship leads, if you can go on to the next one, knowing God leads to encounter. Encountering the real, tangible presence, feeling the love of God, knowing how He feels about you, and that brings about fullness and joy. That fullness in your spirit, that joy, which is different than happiness. Happiness is very circumstantial. Joy comes from, I know no matter what happens in my life, I have an unbreakable relationship with my Papa God. He is with me. Like we just sang, through the fiercest battle, whatever season you're in, if you are in a valley, God is with you, and you're not going to stay there. If you're on a mountaintop, God is with you. Unfortunately, you're also probably not going to stay there, right? Because life. But the consistent thread is God is with us. And the joy and the fullness that comes from knowing Him and from encountering Him in ways that I experience what He's like, that is the gift. That is the reward. That allows me to operate from a different perspective. Now, it probably goes without saying, but I'm not saying to you, this is a formula to exempt yourself from hard things in life. I wish. I would be okay with less hard things in life. Unfortunately, Jesus tells us in this world, you will. You will have trouble. You will be persecuted for being my followers. You will have trials. You will have difficulties. You will experience loss. But I will be with you. I used to sing a song, actually sang it at my best friend's funeral. It says, I know I can make it. And the basis of that is because of who's with me. If God is with me, I can make it. I might not be comfortable. I might not have all of my preferences catered to. I might be all the things we talked about last week. I might be insulted, misunderstood, lied. All of that can happen. Nothing that happens to me takes away the fact that God is with me. He is mine and I am His. I have access to His kingdom. I do. I pray that we all do more and more. How many of you know it's actually possible to live from the resources of the kingdom? And that can include things like money. Now that's like the kiddie pool or the shallow end, right? Like it's so much more than that. It's peace, it's joy, it's those things that the world does everything it can to get a hold of and still comes up short. That's the treasure. Everything that God is can be mine. He will be with me so then I can be at peace. I can have unshakable joy. I can cooperate with His Spirit and see His kingdom extended to other people. That's what I want to see more of. That's what we're aiming at. I can't help but plug September 19th, Street Outreach Training and Outreach Ministry. Now, I understand, I give you the caveat. I don't need everybody to become a street evangelist. I'm not saying that everybody has to look like that. But everybody should be trained in what to do when you encounter someone, how to represent the kingdom and how to minister the presence, how to minister the kingdom of God. It simply means meet other people's needs with God's resources. And the presence that you experience in your relationship with Him can actually leak out. Can I picture this one other way? Because it's not just about the organized outreach. I want us all to become leaky buckets. Have you ever tried to carry a bucket of water that leaks? I grew up on a farm, so we had some rusty old buckets, right? And it doesn't all spill out, but it doesn't all stay in. It leaks out. It makes a mess. I'm not telling you to go make messes, but maybe I am. Let's be leaky buckets. Let's be so filled up with the Spirit of God. Let's experience and encounter Him to such a degree that we actually can't hold it all in, that we go around and it just leaks out. As we tell our story, as we live life as a kingdom person. That's what Jesus was saying. He wasn't saying, here's a list of things to try to adjust in your attitude. He was saying, this is what my dad is like, and if you will come to know me, you can be like that too, because I will make you like that. I will transform you. The encounter with God's presence brings transformation.